Hi, it's Alex from evolutionaryathletics.com. Today I'm coming with a reader question. This came in from Brandon Green. He said, as usual, the videos are fantastic. Potentially a good article or video in the future would be the advisability of speed before strength. This is something Jay Schroeder was high on when I trained with him. Before I lifted in the 90% plus range, I spent 6 months in the 55 to 80% range. Excellent. And thank you for the compliment, and this is what we're going to talk about today. But first, a quick disclaimer. I'm not Jay Schroeder. This is my understanding of the theory based on what I've seen or read. Please don't send me any emails saying I'm stupid or do not have a thorough understanding of his system. Of course I do not. I'm not Jay. Jay doesn't really share information on a regular basis with people, so not too many people do have a thorough understanding of his system. That's why there's so many questions and intrigue. So on my part, this is pure theorizing and speculation. So if you have a better understanding of Jay's system or of his system, please share the correct information. I don't want any emails again saying that I'm stupid or don't know the system. Of course, I don't. So if you have a better understanding, share. We're all willing to learn. In addition, I want people to know that this isn't necessarily how I train my athletes. This is just an answer to the question. Because Jay's so secretive, there's always a lot of intrigue regarding his system or some of the theories behind why he does things the way they are. Obviously, he's very secretive. Brandon trained with him, and he spent 6 months doing essentially dynamic effort type stuff before moving to heavy lifting, and he had a question about, maybe why this would be beneficial for someone. So, hence the video. So, from my understanding, Jay's system has 3 basic phases. The first phase is learning proper position. The second phase is learning how to absorb force, and the third phase is learning how to create force. Phase 1, learning proper position. Jay tends to use iso extremes to accomplish this. In an iso extreme, you're holding a position for 3 to 5 total minutes. According to Dr. J, which this is all referenced from the little compilation of the forum posts from his Facebook page, which have all been deleted. So it was a great resource and a wealth of information. I have what I had saved, and I put them together in a PDF in the resources section, so please check that out. You can download it. It's a collection of posts, so it's not going to read like a manual on Jay's system. You'll have to kind of read, and it jumps around a bit, but there's some good stuff in there. So essentially, he says that most athletes will hold for 7 to 30 seconds. This is because you're pulling maximally into the deepest position. If you're not pulling as hard as possible, then you'll of course be able to hold longer. And so the way it works is let's say you can hold for 30 seconds. You do 10 reps at 30 seconds in the lunge, pulling maximally into the deepest position. You've accomplished 300 seconds, and there's your 5 minutes. When we're pulling maximally in the deepest position in a lunge, you're pulling on the front leg with the hip flexor and the hamstring, and the back leg you're extending with the glute and the quad to extend the knee. So in the lunge, this like on the back leg, for example, we're extending with the glutes. That's going to accomplish 2 things. It's going to activate the glutes. It's also going to lengthen the hip flexors. So these kind of have a corrective exercise kind of component to them. They're going to teach the right muscles to fire at the right time. We're going to lengthen some muscles, and I think we'll do some myofascial remodeling. Or if we have any scar tissue in the muscles, those will break up, because we know scar tissue lays in multiple different directions. The iso extremes will stretch that out and create nice linear layers of the scar tissue or connective tissue. So we'll have a nice easy to move muscle without very many knots or anything like that. The positions for the iso extremes are the lunge, the standing hamstring, the wall squat, the one leg squat, the push-up, the preacher curl, and the scapular pull-up. I've heard that this is a progression order, so I would think One would start with the lunge and the push-up and work for 5 minutes. Once they've mastered that, they'd move to the standing hamstring and the preacher curl. And once they've mastered the standing hamstring, they move to the wall squat. Once they master the wall squat, they go to the one leg squat. And so in the upper body, you master the preacher curl, and then you move on to mastering the scapular pull-up. Back to the remodeling of the myofascia. There is some research that shows that lactic acid accumulation is associated with the development of connective tissue. So this may allow for hypertrophy in the tendons and the myofascia, so all our connective tissues. We know those kind of function like springs. They provide elastic or mechanical energy into the system. They're the reason why Comey's strength curve looks the way it does, because we're not just relying on muscle to produce the energy, but it's also about the connective tissue's ability to absorb and produce force as well. So if we have more myofascia running in proper directions, we're going to have more efficient movement, and we're going to have a better spring or rubber band, or however you want to conceptualize it, to help propel us. Having a better spring or connective tissue, if you think in terms of plyometric or sporting type actions where we're sprinting, putting a better spring in our system would definitely lay a solid foundation for sport performance. The next phase is learning to absorb force. This is where Brandon's question comes into play. This phase, the goal is to learn how to turn on at a high velocity. And so if we look at the chart over here, we have an eccentric load and then a brief isometric and a concentric action. So if we are lifting heavy weights 90% and we're new to training, or we haven't really worked on the eccentric side of the equation, the steepness, the slope, is going to be much more shallow. And with a shallower slope coming in, that means we're going to be absorbing less force. Less force is entering the system because there's less acceleration. That means on the way out, we're going to have a shallower slope as well. We're going to be able to produce less force. So in this phase, from what I've read, Jay likes to move from light to heavy. I believe the idea of this, because it's the absorption phase, is to work over time on increasing the slope of the force coming into the system. So we want a very, very rapid absorption of force. In order to do that, we have to start with lighter weights. So we're working in that 55 to 80% range because we're trying to teach our body how to really take a lot of force into the system very, very rapidly. So force has the mass component, that's the amount of weight on the bar, and the acceleration component, that's how fast it's coming in. So we can increase force production by increasing the amount of force entering the system, the amount of force that we are absorbing. So generally, you work from light to heavy. This makes sense. You wouldn't start doing plyometrics off a 48-inch plyo box. You're going to start off of a small box, 18, 24 inches, learning how to absorb force. With weights, you're not going to dive bomb into the bottom of a bench press with 405 pounds. You're going to start with something much less to increase that, to develop the ability to absorb that force very rapidly. Then over time, you're going to work towards higher and higher boxes and heavier weights. To some extent, this does make sense to me. Generally speaking, you're going to work initially with a stick and hold. So you're going to step off a box, boom, hit the ground, stick the landing, and hold the proper position. And over time, you're going to work to a stick and move, where you're going to stick the landing and then stand up quickly, or drop into the bottom of your squat and explode out of the hole, as opposed to just dive bombing into the bottom of the squat and holding your position. So the idea, again, is the more force you can absorb, the more force you can produce. So again, we are absorbing, you're trying to work from a shallow slope to a steeper slope. The other benefit, I believe, would be from teaching with the lighter weight. Since we've mastered proper position, in phase 1. Now we're going to learn how to move into that position properly at higher velocities. So we're going to start, you can start with even slower eccentrics and sticking, and then gradually increase the speed of the eccentric at the weight that you're working at, maybe 55%. And then over time, you're going to start dive bombing with even heavier and heavier loads until we get around that 80% range. So to answer Brandon's question, I believe the concept is to take in more force rapidly. That way we can have a higher force production in the concentric component of the lift. This makes perfect sense. The eccentric component is very neglected as far as training programs go, and so working on this could be very beneficial for an athlete. It can also help with injury prevention and things of that nature. In addition, lifting heavy loads is pretty risky, so this is another way to get someone who is not very experienced with the proper technique to move a weight. And even if we're dropping and catching, because the load is lighter, we are at less risk of, if we're slightly out of position, of injuring something. Finally, the last phase would be creating force. So you're going to produce force as rapidly as possible. That's the goal of this phase. So where the absorbing force, we started trying to absorb lighter weights and absorb force at more rapid speeds, and we're working this eccentric component. Now we're working on increasing the steepness of this component. So that would be the concentric component. So to do this, rebounds and plyos, so your altitude drops turn into depth jumps. Your free fall squats can be turned into dive bombing and then jump squatting out of the hole, or just exploding out of the hole. In this phase, you're going to work from heavy to light. So you might dive bomb. You're not going to dive bomb 90 or 100% of your weight, but you'll try to, if you're going near maximal, as fast as possible on the way down and explode out of the hole. Over time, we're going to work towards higher and higher velocities. So you might get down to 50, 40, 30% of your 1 rep max and dive bomb into the bottom of a squat and explode out, and that would be a jump squat. So, but the idea is to work from heavy to light. I believe this partially has to do with dynamic correspondence. What we do on the field of play is generally unweighted for most of the time, unless you're like an offensive lineman. But if you're like even a linebacker or a wide receiver, you're doing a lot of running without a ton of contact or resistance. So we meet the dynamic correspondence with faster velocity. Also, the faster we move, the more complex and coordinated the movement becomes, because we're having to move our limbs faster than we've ever moved them. So when we're going towards lighter weights, we're improving that coordination of the movement. So this is kind of my general overview of the system and kind of why the progression is laid out the way it is. It's not the way I train people. I'm not Jay. This is just kind of a brief summary. And to hit on Brandon's question one more time, I think the reason why it's done is to really focus on developing the force absorption capacity. So you spend a lot of time at that lighter weight really learning how to absorb that force on the bench press or the squat as quickly as possible, because time and time again when they do force plate studies, they find that even if two athletes have the same lift, if they let's say you have two athletes that can bench press 405 and they're shot putters, and one is an all-world guy and one's just kind of an also-ran, and you're like, well, what's the difference between the two? It comes down to this curve right here. The steeper the slope, the higher the level of the athlete. So the guy that benches 405 but is just your generic just a generic thrower, he's going to have shallower, excuse me, introduction, or a shallower eccentric slope, which in turn leads to a shallower concentric slope, which means that that shot is gonna get moving after the windup much slower, which means that it's not going to go quite as far. The elite level athlete that benches 405 will descend into the bench press very rapidly, absorb, which because there's a higher acceleration component, absorb more force, which means that on the way out of the hole, he's going to produce more force. So when we're throwing, this translates into more force being put into the object that we're throwing, whether it's a shot or a punch or anything else. So we really want to hammer home the importance in athletics of this side of the force curve. Everybody likes to focus on rate of force development on this side, but the rate of force development eccentrically or deceleration is equally as important. The steeper this is, the steeper that is. Thank you for listening. I am Alex with Evolutionary Athletics, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact me.